if we don't look at what's happening on the inside, a whole piece of what needs to change and a whole piece of the understanding about how people work when they're responding to difficult information, so at that point of engagement, and how people go through a group process of change isn't going to be included. You know, we need to understand what happens psychologically for people. So it's, you know, we talk about the spiritual aspects of transition. So in the Heart and Soul group, we talk about addressing the spiritual, the consciousness, and the psychological aspects of transition. And when I say the word spiritual, people go, oh, you know, is that religion? Is that what you're talking about? And it's not about religion. It's about what we are beyond just those other things, what we do, what we make. So we're not just consumers. We're not just people who do our jobs. We're not just people who drive a car or buy a particular magazine. We're also people who care deeply about each other, about our children, about life on earth, about the places that we live, about the beauty of the world around us, and who have a longing and a deep kind of commitment to creating good society, you know, creating a society that reflects our deepest values of honesty and integrity and care and love. And that doesn't get talked about very much when you're talking about how we're going to feed ourselves or how we're going to move about, you know, if there's less petrol. But actually that's a really key part of the transition, is to rename those things, you know, to keep talking about them. I've started to look at the psychology of change in kind of two areas. So one is to do with the psychology of reacting to very difficult information. So what happens to people when they hear that the whole world and the arrangement of the world and the worldview that they grew up with is no longer going to be useful or relevant. So, you know, what some people talk about as the end of suburbia, the end of suburbia moment. That moment when you see a film like End of Suburbia or Crude Awakening that says the whole world is going to change. You know, we cannot go on as we are. And Rob's talked about it a little bit in his book, this idea that it's kind of like a bereavement. You know, you can see it in a similar way to somebody losing somebody that they love. And there are different stages or different phases that people go through in that process. So one of them is denial, and often that's people's first place. And you could say that we're collectively still mainly in a place of denial, where if you read our newspapers, you know, probably 90% of what's printed or what you see on the television, what's in our media, says business as usual is the way things are. Economic growth is good, you know, recession is terrible, go flying, you know, take more holidays. It's great when consumer spending is up. You know, that's still the basic story that's out in our media. And alongside that, you have stories that say Arctic ice is melting, sea levels are rising, oil prices have doubled, although they've come back down again now. You know, there are these huge environmental and kind of resource issues that are happening alongside this business as usual message. So the first stage it is, and there's plenty of reasons why people should go on reading and listening to the 90% of our media that says everything's fine. So the first stage is denial. The second stage, for most people, is despair. So for most people, there's a place that they get to where they cannot see a way through the changes ahead. And it feels hopeless. It feels impossible to think that anything's going to be the same again. A bit like that phase when you've lost somebody and your life feels like it's fallen apart and you can't imagine how it will ever come back together again and feel worth living. And that's a really difficult stage, and it's a stage that's particularly difficult if you go through it on your own. So one of the things that we really encourage people to do is to, for instance, if they show a film like End of Suburbia, to make sure there's a kind of group discussion afterwards, so people see that information and then get to talk through how they feel about it and see that other people have similar feelings of hopelessness or anger or whatever it is, despair. But actually, if people really go into that and let themselves feel that, there's always a shift. So at some point, that feeling turns into a kind of pathway back into life again, and seeing that actually maybe there's another way, maybe there's a different way of living that could be okay. And then, people can get the transition message, which is actually it might even be better than what we've got at the moment. So it'll be different, and there'll be things that we'll have to let go of, but maybe we could have some of the things that we really lack in our society today. So the third stage is a kind of bargaining stage. And in the bargaining stage, what people do is a kind of, if I recycle all my bottles, I can still go on holiday abroad. If I drive a bit less, I can treat myself to a new sofa, or whatever it is. And I think there's quite a lot of that starting to happen with people that are engaging with the information, where if I do a little bit, I can have something else. And then the final stage is acceptance. So in the final stage, there's an acceptance that we're on or very close to a downward energy curve. And as we climb the curve with more and more of everything every year, as we go down the energy curve, there's likely to be less and less of everything. And that won't be in a straight line. It'll probably be ups and downs. But basically, we need to learn to live with less oil, less energy, less of some things. But as we do that, we can find really good things to put back into our society that we've lost as we've climbed that energy curve. So, you could say we're at peak oil, but in a way we're probably at the lowest ever level of trust. We're probably at the lowest ever level of feeling safe in your community, of knowing your neighbours, of feeling connected, of feeling kind of skilled up to deal with life on your own. So there are all of these things that we can get back to that actually make life more rich, more enjoyable, more, more safe, where you feel okay to walk out in your community, and an expectation that if you need help from someone would help you, rather than what we have at the moment, where people are often scared to go out of their front doors, or, would be suspicious of people on the street. I think the piece that I hold at the centre, both of Transition Town Totnes and in the network, is to do with a kind of deepening of that needs to happen for people in transition. So for me, the kind of personal process of transition isn't that one day you wake up and you have your end of suburbia moment and you get over it and then you're done. For me, there's a kind of ongoing process that happens, and it's been true for me. I've been working in transition for 2.5 years, and I feel like in that time I've personally been on an unending journey of understanding more and more about how I have been cut off from life in subtle ways, not in every part of my life, but subtle ways that the beliefs of our society have worked in me. And, through being involved in something that is so life-affirming and so much about coming back to what we really are as human beings, I feel that working in me all the time, as I kind of deepen my sense of connection with life, with nature, of working with people who believe in the things that I believe in, of working for something that feels positive for humanity. So there's something about that deepening process that often gets left out, and people talk in transition about the need to include everybody. A successful transition project is one where you've engaged a huge number of your community. And we had Marianne Williamson come and talk in Totnes a year ago, and she talked about the need for the people at the centre of transition to keep deepening. She talked about it for any social movement, that if the leaders keep deepening into what it is that they're trying to bring about, they'll go on attracting more people. And when the people at the centre stop deepening, it's possible that the movement can't grow anymore, because there's no more depth and weight to what's being explored and what's being said, to pull in more people at the edges. You know, and it's quite an esoteric kind of way of looking at it, but I think it's quite an interesting way, rather than just having an anxiety about bringing in more and more people. Actually, that sense, people at the centre need to really deepen, and they need to keep going further into what it is. What does it mean? You know, what is transition? What does that really mean?